Taking care of babies had never been a problem for Bella. She was experienced, patient, and had seen it all. Or at least, that's what she thought until that night. The parents of little Dobby hired her to stay overnight at their house while they went out for dinner. It was a simple job. Give him the bottle, put him in the crib, and monitor him through the baby monitor. But there was one peculiar detail in the baby's room. A large full-length mirror positioned right next to the crib. As soon as she put the baby to sleep, the nanny noticed something strange. The reflection of the boy seemed delayed. Small movements that should have been simultaneous happened with a slight delay in the mirror, and sometimes a small smile appeared on the baby's lips, even though the real baby was asleep. The nanny tried to ignore it, convincing herself she was just tired. But as the night went on, her discomfort grew. While watching TV in the living room, she heard a faint noise coming from the baby monitor, a subtle static sound, followed by a child's giggle. This shouldn't have been possible. The baby was sound asleep. She grabbed the monitor and adjusted the camera to get a better look. What she saw made her heart race. In the mirror, the baby was awake, sitting in the crib, staring directly at the camera. The worst part, the real baby was still asleep. The nanny froze, unable to react. The child's giggle sounded again, but this time it wasn't coming from the monitor. Terrified, she stood up and ran to the bedroom. The baby was still sleeping, but in the mirror, the baby was still sitting up, smiling. The nanny moved closer, trying to understand what she was seeing. That's when the reflection of the baby raised a tiny finger and pointed. Directly behind her, she felt a presence. Slowly, she turned around but saw nothing. However, when she looked back at the mirror, she saw something that made her freeze in place. Behind her, a dark figure was rising in the corner of the room, watching them. The nanny grabbed the baby and ran, not daring to look back. In the living room, she locked herself in and called the baby's parents, demanding they come back immediately. While she waited, she heard nails scratching the wood of the baby's room. Something was trying to get out. The parents arrived minutes later and found the nanny pale, shaking, holding the child. When they opened the bedroom door, everything seemed normal. The mirror was there, reflecting only an empty room. But as they looked more closely, they noticed something etched into the surface of the glass. A childlike drawing, a wide smile, and two dark eyes staring back at them. When a nanny was hired to look after Maria while her parents were away, she had no idea what awaited her. The little girl, although still young, had a strange connection with one of her dolls. The doll was old, with large eyes and a bizarre smile. Maria talked about it as if it were a real person. "My doll talks to me, you know?" Maria said with a shy smile while playing with the doll on the living room floor. The nanny, thinking it was just another childhood fantasy, smiled and asked, "Oh, really? What does she say?" Maria answered, "She says she's lonely and wants me to take her to bed with me." The nanny didn't pay much attention to it and continued with her tasks. But as the night went on, she started noticing something strange. The doll was no longer where Maria had left it. Once it was on the bed. Another time it was in the kitchen chair. The nanny always put it back in the same spot, but the next minute the doll would disappear. Confused, she asked Maria, "Are you taking the doll and moving it?" Maria looked at her with wide eyes. "No, she moves by herself. The doll doesn't like being alone." The discomfort grew. The nanny tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was all just coincidence. But the situation became even stranger when, upon entering Maria's room to check if she was asleep, she saw the doll lying beside the bed, its eyes locked on her, as if watching her. That same night, while in the living room, the nanny heard a faint whisper coming from the baby monitor. It sounded like a child's giggle. Maria was deeply asleep. But the doll was standing by the girl's bed, with its bizarre smile and eyes fixed on her. With her heart racing, the nanny immediately called Maria's parents. "You need to come back. Something's wrong." When the parent arrived, the nanny, still visibly terrified, told them what had happened. Together, they entered the room, but everything seemed normal. Maria was sound asleep in bed, and the doll was in its place, sitting in the corner chair. The relief was immediate, but the nanny insisted that the doll be removed from the house, and the parents, even though they didn't fully understand what had happened, agreed. Later, while the nanny was sitting on the couch trying to calm down, she heard a sound coming from Maria's room, as if something was dragging. She decided to go check. When she opened the door, she found Maria sleeping peacefully, but something made her freeze. The doll was back, sitting in the chair, its eyes locked on her. The bizarre smile seemed even more real. With her heart pounding, she slowly approached. That's when she heard the doll say, "I'm not leaving." Julia was a young nanny, newly hired to care for a girl named Laura. The child's parents were very busy and often traveled, leaving Julia with the responsibility of spending the nights in the large house where the family lived. The house had a dark beauty, with antique furniture and paintings on every wall, but Julia quickly got used to surroundings and followed her routine. On the first night she was alone with Laura, Julia noticed something strange. The girl, despite being very young, always seemed to be staring at the fireplace. Laura didn't speak much, but every time Julia got close to that corner, the child began to say odd things. "She's here," Laura said in a soft and eerie voice, pointing at the fireplace. "She calls me." Although a little frightened, Julia tried to stay calm. After all, Laura was just a child, and she was probably imagining things. But the sense of discomfort grew as the night went on. Later, when Julia went to check if Laura was asleep, she heard a faint sound coming from the living room, as if something was being dragged. When she approached the door, she noticed that the light in the living room was on, even though she clearly remembered turning it off before going to Lara's room. Upon entering, Julia saw a pale, translucent figure standing by the fireplace. It was a woman with long hair, wearing an old white nightgown. Her face was distorted, like a mask of pain, and she stared fixedly at Julia. Julia tried to scream, but her voice failed. The ghostly woman slowly turned and began to approach, as if floating above the floor. Laura was awake, lying in her bed, eyes wide, watching the scene without saying a word. "She likes you," Laura whispered, without taking her eyes off the ghost. A chill ran through Julia's body. The room grew colder and colder, and the figure seemed to merge with the shadows. Before Julia could react, the ghost disappeared, and the warmth slowly returned to the room. Desperate, Julia ran to Laura and picked her up. The girl, as if nothing had happened, asked, "Is she coming back?" The next morning, Lara's parents arrived and noticed nothing unusual. The house was quiet, as always, but Julia knew what she had seen, and Lara's question still echoed in her mind.